Podcast for podcasters by podcasters. Podcasting Smarter is the official podcast from Podbean, featuring podcasting interviews, best practices, and helpful tips. We're here to give you the tools, resources, product updates, and news to help you get started podcasting and keep your podcast growing.
Welcome back, everyone, to Podcasting Smarter and our January live event. We are so excited that you're joining us here today. My name is Norma Jean Belenke. I'm the head of events here at Podbean, and we've got a really special event for you here today. We're here with the folks from Dear Alice, which is a podcast all about interior design, and you'd be thinking, that's a visual medium, right? Homes and how people decorate spaces. How does that translate into a podcast? But they've done it really well, and they've monetized in a really cool way, a couple of really cool creative ways, which we're going to get into. So stay tuned. I'm going to read our brief intro, and then we'll jump in. So welcome to Podcasting Smarter and our January live event, Designing Success, a conversation with the Dear Alice Design podcast on podcast growth and monetization with Cori, Jess Bennett, and Suzanne Hall, the creative forces behind Alice Lane Interior Design. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions like this one with top podcasters, and we also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast. So make sure to check that out as well. This event is part of Podbean's big January launch month here at Podbean, with a series of events in January all about launching and helping you maintain a sustainable, successful podcast. So make sure to check out last week's live with Dan Hewley of Focusrite, talking all about production best practices. And John from Podbean also talks about Podbean Academy and really the library of resources we have for you to learn all about podcasting. That was a couple of weeks ago as well, and we'll have those links for you here in the description. Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean, and this event today is brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetizing platform and home to over 640,000 podcasts. To start your podcast, head over to podbean.com today. And now we'll get started. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
So first off, welcome. You know, you guys are the Dear Alice podcast. Give us a brief overview of what your podcast is all about. You know, obviously introduce yourselves and share a little bit about the podcast. And then we'll talk about, you know, kind of what you guys have gotten out of it, format, marketing, and all of that as well.
You bet. Dear Alice is a lifestyle approach to interior design. So we really focus on the person, how they want to live, and create a lifestyle around that. It's not necessarily so much about like what's trending right now on HGTV or in the magazines. It's like, let's think about who you are as a person and give you our best design tips, tricks, things that are successful. We are interior designers full-time, creating dream houses, and we're just trying to teach the public any basic rules, ideas, things that are working, things that don't work anymore, what's on the cutting edge, what's on the cutting edge. I don't know. What else would you add to that?
I think it's just giving people permission to figure out who they are first. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what we do. We do share tips and just kind of the rules and things that have been successful since we've been doing this for like 15, 20 years now. We've done a lot of homes. And so we know we've had like great mistakes and bad mistakes. And so we try and share all of that with our listeners. And one thing I think that sets us apart is the fact that it's called Dear Alice is kind of mastered after the Dear Abby. Like it's a very listener involved community. And so we've really, really felt that. And we actually answer their questions on our podcast. So not only I think we get like super fans that way because they're waiting to hear the question that they've sent in. And then I think it just like springboards so many other questions from other listeners. So we really just try and like listen to their concerns. What on a normal level are people dealing with? And how can we help solve those problems knowing what we know in a luxury lifestyle brand. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next thing I was going to say was, you know, obviously nobody's name is Alice, right? No. On the podcast, right? It's Jess, it's Suze, it's you, it's Cori. So, you know, it's something where if you haven't listened to the podcast before, it does have that Dear Abby format of, you know, people writing in questions about interior design. And I think that's something where they don't have to necessarily have the budget or the project to hire Alice Lane Home Design, but they still can submit their questions and get expertise. And it really builds your community, which we're going to talk talk about a little bit later. But it's a really phenomenal podcast. And, you guys talk about everything that runs the gamut in terms of interior design. So we're also going to talk about episode ideas and that kind of thing later. But in terms of the success of the podcast, because it has been really successful, what do you think are the key elements that have created that and have contributed to the success and the growth of the Dear Alice podcast?
It's a really good question. Right. I'm going to kind of go with what some of the comments have been, because we feel like maybe we're just sitting inside of an echo chamber and we know what we know, but it's fun to hear what people say to us. And I feel like they really love the Dear Alice podcast because there's not a lot of podcasts in our space of interior design. And those that are on it, I think the way that they talk to their audience isn't as candid or as open or fluid about mistakes that are being made. And this isn't a perfect industry. We're trying to do a beautiful job and people want to have these perfect lifestyles, but we know the nuts and bolts and the guts of the whole thing. So I think we're just talking to them like friends and we're saying, do this, don't do this. Oh, we tried this once. Here's what happened. We're just really giving them some working knowledge on what to do in their own homes and their projects, answering questions. I don't know. Why do you guys think it's been successful? Why do people like Dear Alice? What's different about it? Have you guys listened to other interior design podcasts?
I've listened to a couple and you kind of know immediately if it's going to be like one that you'll be interested in or not based off of just like how casual they are, how like honest that feels or how intimidating it is. And like where in interior design, I think historically has been a very intimidating topic, where like there's this prestige to it when in reality, everyone has space. Everyone has hopefully like has a home or is trying to at least reflect themselves within a space. And so I do think it's just like by being honest, Jess, you kind of mentioned that we're just like talking to each other as friends in a room when we're recording and with their questions, like we feel like we're talking to them and based off of just like how they reached out to us and interacted with us or recognized us on the street. Like we like really feel like they're friends, when we see them live and we want to answer their questions so that they can live more beautifully, making whatever decision it is they're making and whatever budget they're making. And so I really do think that that's been the reason why if I wasn't in that room recording, why I would still listen to it is because people are being really authentic and offering up information for me to benefit from and make better decisions when I'm trying to do my own space. So yeah. Cori, what do you think?
I would just say it's all of my favorite podcasts. I don't listen to another one that is, about interior design because I work in it all day.
Right.
the personalities shine through in my favorite ones. And I think it's another thing that we do. We take design very seriously, but then we're loose like with each other because we're just, we're friends. We've known each other for 10 plus years. And we kind of just are who we are. And we don't, we say some things that are a little bit, unfiltered and we just let it go. And we just are who we are. And I think that gives people a good glimpse about like who we are outside of work, and that makes us relatable. I think that makes anybody relatable. If someone is just genuine with you, that's something that's an attractive quality that people have.
I feel like taste too is one of those things that's like this sort of ethereal cloud in the sky, and they don't know if they have it or they don't, and they don't want to insult it. And it's just like one of the most personal things about a person is their taste. And we're talking about building interiors based on your taste, your lifestyle. And so I think as normal as we can make that, and as we can get them to extract who they are into their space, it can become less intimidating and they can feel really honored about whatever their taste is, right? So I think that we're not trying to be perfect. I think that's one of the things about interior design is like you're trying to create this perfect space styled perfectly for this person that, wants to be able to walk in the home and have all their friends be impressed. And we're not trying to be perfect. We're not teaching people how to be perfect. We're teaching them how to be them in their space. And I think that feels really good. And authentically, you feel like you can create a space around that instead of it being all about taste level and expensive things and things that people will adore because it's come from far and wide corners of the earth and it's in the very most best prestigious, highest level, top shelf, top brass kind of thing. And we kind of take all the air out of that helium balloon and we just try and deliver it straight to them. And so then they can do with it whatever they can on their own budget with their means, with their resources, the people they know, the places they shop, and create something that's really individual and fantastic for them, wherever they're at, whatever level they're at. So I think we try and make it normal.
We do try and make it normal.
Yeah. And that's something that's also a really big factor in podcasting as a whole. And we've heard this from podcasters, not specifically interior design, but within other industries that have a podcast or within other creators that are podcasting on different topics and niches. And it's that relatability. It's that authenticity of like, hey, we're all human. We're all going to, be on this human journey together, with design. And here's why we're doing this, but nobody's better than anybody else. And maybe we learned some things and we're doing this as a job and we've had careers, for decades, but we're here to share that knowledge in a very inclusive and vulnerable way, right? And taking that expertise and really opening up, about what that process is like versus, I'm the expert in that kind of top down sound as well. So I think that also really contributes to the reason why people want to listen to the show and what makes it so engaging and inclusive for everybody who is a listener as well. We're really thrilled to have Dear Alice hosted and monetized through Podbean. So what aspects of Podbean's strategy and approach have you found most effective in terms of the monetization for Dear Alice?
I would say we know interior design. We're not monetization experts.
Yeah.
So it's been nice to be able to partner with Podbean because then we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to know the numbers and, do all of that legwork. It's been quote unquote not worry about it very much and let the people who are good at it do it.
Amen.
Leave that to the professionals.
We employed a full-time person before we partnered with Podbean who would just work with different people on getting advertisements, getting the scripts, getting the contracts figured out. How much money is this for this? Is it a mid-roll? Is it a pre-roll? And pretty soon we felt like we were being this little mini ad agency. Plus we were also trying to do this work. And so you just have to have a big staff to be able to do this, but also they don't know how to best monetize or represent the podcast. And I don't know, it's so much easier for us just to do what we're good at and leave the rest to you because you guys are good at it. And when you partner together in that way, then we can both be good at what we're good at and not have to worry about employing a whole nother person and trying to teach them what to do because what we know isn't what you guys know. So it just takes, I think, all the hassle out of it, makes it so much easier. You can concentrate on, your sphere
and your content, really.
Yeah.
And what we do best is what we should do, and what you do best is what you should do.
Because this is
we'll all help each other grow.
Yeah, and Dear Alice isn't our full-time job. Our full-time job is designing homes. And then secondly, we sit down, once a week and we do this, but we need to be able to monetize and make money in other places. And so it makes it so we can't do our real job and can't do our podcast if we're also trying to chase down ads. And we're like, we're not in business to do that. We're in business to design homes. So it's been a really nice partnership. And, we were able to free up a whole employee now that we don't need to do that. And she can focus on something different. And we're all doing what we're good at. So we really love the partnership with Podbean. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that, until you work with us, you don't know, right? We have a whole team that's really working on the advertising side. And, you mentioned a couple of terms, mid-roll, pre-roll. Pre-roll is I always like to break down terms for everybody out there, no matter what, how deep into podcasting you are. A pre-roll is an ad that's going to go at the beginning of your show. Mid-roll is going to cut in somewhere in the middle. And then post-roll is going to be at the end of the episode. And these ads are inserted through software that we have here at Podbean, and you can do it yourself. We can run it for you. You can even find the advertising yourself and use the software, or, we can do it for you. And we also have relationships with a lot of really big brands, right? So we can go out and, work with brands that are going to buy the number of impressions, right? Maybe more downloads than any specific show, but it'll be across, a bunch of Podbean shows that are monetizing based on demographic. So we have an amazing team. And so it's really great to hear that feedback as well. And you're right. I think that we've talked to a lot of podcasters about this. You don't get into podcasting because you want to learn to sell ads. You get into podcasting because you love making your show, right? Because you love the content, you want to engage with the audience, and you want to, assist your brand and, really into that brand and marketing piece of Alice Lane Home Design and all of that as well. So that's just fantastic feedback to hear. And, in terms of how the podcast has directly affected Alice Lane interior design, I'd love for you guys to speak about how the podcast has integrated into your overall marketing strategy, and then how you've utilized the podcast and leveraged maybe messaging and your audience for the business as well. Cori, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we've been able to expand our reach. One of our first goals when we, started the podcast was to establish ourselves as experts. And I think that's been a really big focus of ours. I mean, if I could say I think we're doing that. Yeah. Just kind of taking the knowledge that we have and openly sharing it with our listeners, and just being a good resource for our audience.
Yeah. I think besides trying to establish ourselves as an authoritative design voice, one other thing we've done is we've teamed up with our Instagram. And whenever we have a podcast come out, it's always on a Thursday. And that whole week, we tell the story visually because this isn't a visual medium. So we just barely recorded, we just barely had a podcast come out on the fifth wall, which is the ceiling of the home. And we showed all of our projects that had specialized ceilings that whole week during the podcast. So they could see visually what we're talking about. And then here comes Thursday, and all we're talking about is ceilings. And they've been trained to look at ceilings all week. And then we really stick the landing on Thursday and then show more ceilings Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So we try and visually tell the story that whole week, and then the podcast comes out. And so we're able to support the podcast that way by also teaching people. And then also they want to tune into the podcast because they've been being schooled on this. They're like, you know what? I could do something with my ceiling. I should listen to that one. So that's another way we've sort of teamed up with our marketing department to expand reach, expand our ability to communicate visually as well as verbally what we're trying to teach. And I think people really, that clicks in when they're able to sync up the two different mediums between podcast and social. So that's been really helpful. And I don't know, you just never really know who your reach is. Sue and I go to market at High Point, and we get flooded now with interior designers that are like, we want to meet you. We love Dear Alice. And you're like, you hear us? You're
listening?
Like, you're a designer. We feel like just like people that don't know much about design would want to listen, but interior designers like to listen to it. And that's been really fun too, to expand the reach all the way. We can compare notes, talk about different topics. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Just on top of that really quickly, I was going to say that we've been surprised about how many professionals actually listen to us, which really shows us that there's not a lot of people talking out loud about a lot of industries, right? And just being super candid about what are the flaws? How do we work? Nobody's out there sharing how do you do business? Here's how we do business. And so it really is a way to just kind of just open the books a little bit, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also something where it adds credibility to each of you guys as designers, but it also adds credibility to Alice Lane Home Design. And Alice Lane Home Design has a lot of different things going on, right? You guys also manufacture home goods as well. So how has the podcast really, Home Goods, has it brought in business for design work and bids? Yeah. What has it brought in?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. We have a whole bunch of different facets that, we're able to monetize. And for the store, we have a free design service, which is we'll design and do any furnishings in a room and choreograph that whole look with designers. And then they sell them the whole room of furniture. We get more leads for that department through the podcast than any other thing that we're doing, which we're producing, reels and lots of different videos showing the service on our Instagram all the time. For some reason, I feel like the podcast, you get people that are really in your funnel. They're in the middle of your funnel or the bottom of your funnel. They're buying your products. They're obsessed with you. They love you.
They need help.
And they need help. And they're like, oh, what? You have a free service? So in the podcast at the beginning, we'll either talk about that free service or we'll talk about our To the Trade program. And we don't have to pay for our ad because we're just talking about it socially. And then all of these leads come in. So it's these people that already trust you. And it's the best way to advertise is to people that are in your funnel. And we just find that the podcast is the people that trust us and like us and respect us. And they show up for us week after week. And then if we want to talk about any part of our business, they're there for it, which is really exciting. We could even do a better job than we're doing. But I will say, the leads come. I think the sales come as well. Whenever we send out an email about the podcast that week, we always send out an email and I think a text saying that this week's episode is about this. The open rate for that email is 87%, which is unheard of.
That's so
huge.
Email
Huge.
rates are 1%, 2%, and it's only 1 or 2% the whole week. And then the podcast email, 87%. People,
I knew that.
I know,
amazing.
It's wild. People all open it. They click on it to listen. They also purchase things off of that email. We'll have a few products that we're highlighting for the week. And so sales come in just because we're talking about the podcast. They're like, oh, it's podcast day. Yay. And then they get busy and here come the sales.
It's
so
like a gift with purchase.
totally. And they know we're not trying to sell them anything because it's not salesy. We're just saying, hey, that podcast is live. This is what it's about this week. Here's a few photos to illustrate what we're talking about.
Favorite things.
And it just works every time. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I think that branding piece also plays a really big part. We hear from a lot of businesses on the branding side where podcasting isn't about direct sales. Podcast ads are, but podcasting in terms of your content, you're not going to hard push every week because it's relational, right? The people that buy one of the featured products, they're not listening every week for a new product. They're listening every week because they're part of your community and because they trust your brand and they trust the voices of your brand and the expertise, right? Behind Alice Lane Home Design and each, one of you individually. But it's also where because that, direct push isn't there, there's no pressure. And so that branding becomes even stronger in terms of its impact directly on sales or, like you said, with some of the design services that you guys have as well. It may be something where, they hear about the service where, the design is free, but then you buy all the furniture in the room. They may hear about it 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 times. And then to pop of, it'll pop up top of mind when they're ready for that kind of thing. So it's really about knowing that you'll be there and they can trust that you'll be there when the time is right for them, which I think is also a really important aspect as well. And for everybody out there who is a podcaster, for all of our podcasting community here at Podbean, what advice would you have for podcasters who are working with a brand or who are from a brand aiming to grow and monetize their shows?
I think it kind of comes back to the authenticity. Like, what do you have to speak about that is true, that people want to listen to? Because again, when we started this, we're like, whenever anybody would say, I heard your podcast, we're like, thank you. You heard our podcast? Why? Pray tell. But I think genuinely, what would you want to hear? And so that's always what we're thinking about. What are people asking? Obviously, when they submit questions. But if you're just starting, what do you have to offer that's gold that people can't find anywhere else? What's your perspective and your point of view? Because that's what people want to hear from us. Because even all three of us have different points of view within design. And so it's a really which I think it would be really boring if just one of us was just talking to a camera versus all three of us conversing. So I do think that's kind of like when you watch ESPN, or you watch anything where there's several different people kind of battling it out. I think it's good to have different points of view. And so make sure that whatever you have to offer, whatever you want to podcast about, is something that is either a niche or something that nobody's offering right now. You can't find it anywhere. So therefore you need to bring it to market.
Also, I feel like that's passion, right?
Yeah,
so you want people to be passionate about their topic. And it doesn't matter if you give them all this information for free. You're not going to go out of business. It just means that they're going to trust you to come to you and say, I know you've talked about design for 4 years now. I'm sure everything I need to know is out there if I listen to all the Dear Alice episodes. I'm not going to do that. I still want to hire you. You know what I mean? So I feel like you should I think that just builds more trust when you teach people what you know. They still want you to do it. There's still going to be plenty of business for you. I think you give it all away for free on the podcast, leave nothing behind. I mean, as much as you can verbally, right? But I do think that's, you give up people's trust from that. And they really see you as an expert because of how thorough you are and how passionate you are about your topic. And it just makes them want to work with you. So it's great.
And I think that monetizing your brand should not be top of mind when you're starting a podcast. If that's going to come off in your episodes and it's going to turn people away. All three of us, our personalities we're not salesy, So when we when we do talk about our product or our services, we try to make it a genuine thing and not be you guys gotta, it try to just
right. It's not a hard sell.
Stronger on anybody.
That's not us. That wasn't our goal in starting the podcast. I think those can be the fruits of your labor, and I think that's great, but it shouldn't be goal number one for sure.
Yeah, I don't even think we talked about our services for 2 years. And then
we're I guess we could do that.
And then they were like, you should. And then all these leads kept coming in. We're like, oh, we should probably tell them to follow us on Instagram. We didn't even think we're such bad business people that way. We didn't even think to talk about ourselves. Yeah. We just wanted to share what we could about interior design. And I think, to that, our marketing team always says, nobody wants to be sold, but everybody wants to buy. So I think that, nobody ever wants to be sold on anything, but you tell them about this cool thing you're doing and they're like, how do I find that thing? And you're like, oh yeah, of course. Let us put that in the link in the email. We're going to be talking about the Luca cocktail table, how we made it, one of our products that we designed, and let's put a link to it so people can look at it. And if they want, they can buy it. And just because we're not selling anybody, people want to buy it. And there's just like a real truth of marketing, right there. Just don't sell anybody anything. They're going to want to buy it if they're interested.
Yeah. And don't be gatekeepers either. I think that's also, I think something that's attributes to the success is that, like, if you have something, say you found the best eye patch or the best product, you want to tell everybody about it. That's how we feel about what we know. We just want to tell everybody about it. And so, don't be a gatekeeper if you're starting out and trying to like hold your arm over what you know dearest, and you're not going to tell your audience that. Like, share what you can.
Yeah. Even if people say, Sue, we want to know what color your red lip is, and it has nothing to do about interior design,
tell them.
Sue's going to tell them what brands of lipstick she likes to use to get her red lip. Yeah. So we share it all.
No, I love that. And I think that kind of adds to the overall trust and interaction that the audience is going to have with you. And I do kind of want to ask you, because a lot of companies and a lot of podcasters ask, how long, what is that timeline like? How long should I wait until I start, mentioning products or mentioning what the company's doing? And so, Cori, I love what you said. Don't come out of the gate marketing. Like, that's not what this is. Branding is a real long game. So can you guys tell us a little bit about the evolution of, I think, Jess, you kind of had mentioned this a little bit, how, you had started mentioning products and the sales were coming in, but what was the timeline and a bit on the evolution of that?
It was a couple of years, being honest. Even still to this day, if we're like, oh, we could like talk about the product in this way, we never do it from a sales. Like, we always try to relate it back to our topic. Like, and that's the reason we talk about it. Marketing may be a secondary reason that we're not even shooting for. So, I mean, we still do that. So and it was for sure at least 2 years before we were like talking about our services.
I don't know that that's a best practice for all y'all, but I think
we're not gatekeepers, so we're going to say it out louder.
Think about it, and we should have thought about it. I think somebody could do it. Once they establish that trust and who they are, I think they can start weaving things into the conversation, because naturally we're people. We want to know about other people. Like, why are they so knowledgeable about interior design? What are they doing when they're not podcasting? And so, of course, they'd want to know, we have a design firm. We have experience doing this. This is how we have the knowledge on these projects we're working on. This is what we're learning. Here's one thing to avoid. So you kind of have to give them some background information to also establish trust. And I think you can learn how to weave in more of your story, or that these services are available, or we have room for a new project. We've woven in something like that before, not to be salesy, just to make ourselves available to them, in a really nice way in case they're interested. Because I know a lot of people are like, gosh, it takes years to get into you guys, because these houses take years to do. And, the wait list is probably so long. So we're like, hey, heads up, we have an opening right now. And so we can weave that into a conversation, and it's not salesy. It's just more informational. But you can find a way to do it authentically that won't turn people off. And I think you could start doing it, pretty soon, right?
Pretty early in your journey.
But within the first few months, I think also just probably if you have, I imagine, I'm not an expert, but if you have like a legitimate website or something that says, that also backs you up and says you're the expert. Like we have like projects that we've been doing for years, that people, again, they can kind of fact check it and say, okay, they're legitimate. Yes. Oh, they have product too. I'm going to buy from them, or, whatever phase of, establishing their space they're at, we have a service for them, that the podcast then turns back and helps all those other facets.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important as well, to establish yourself as an expert. And I love, all three of you touched on this about how you want to inform, but you don't want to sell, right? It's something where you can say, hey, this is what, we're up to. And maybe we have a spot in the books for a home design or for a service, a design service. And if you're interested, you can let us know. But, we just wanted to keep you updated. That kind of thing is different than, sign up now or you're going to miss out. And I think that that's a really important aspect as well, because the podcast isn't going to end next week. It's a continued relationship. And so as the audience continues to trust and listen to the podcast, they're going to continue that journey with you. It's not a one and done sale, right? It's not a, well, I guess I didn't buy the full design home right? remodel this week. I guess, I'm never going to listen to the podcast again. That's not it. It's relational and it's about building that trust. So I think that that's a really great point as well. And I think that you had also spoken about a little bit about how you market the podcast as well with your marketing team. Jess, you had spoken about the Instagram and kind of dropping those visuals throughout the week. And I think Cori had spoken about the newsletter. So can you guys talk a little bit about the runway and what you guys do in terms of marketing the podcast? What's sustainable for the show? Because a lot of podcasters feel they have to be everywhere, and that can be very intimidating. So, figuring out what works for your audience and what has made an impact for Dear Alice.
I mean, you could, depending on the staff and how much time you want to put into this, there's endless ideas, right? But I think one thing that's nice too, if we're like looking for a topic, or we know we're going to be talking about kitchens. And so we might ask a question to our audience. We'll tell our social girl, hey, we're talking about kitchens tomorrow. Ask them what questions they have for us about kitchens. And then we're answering their questions on the podcast, because we're like, everybody's going to want to know this question. Like, what's our favorite appliance package? Everybody's going to want to know. So we'll kind of go through and filter the questions about what we think most people would want to know, and then talk about that on the podcast. So we use our community, and you can create a whole community marketing wise, whether that be emails while you're answering questions. I have my girl right now that sends me a Marco Polo, and she's like, hey, we have these questions, and they sent pictures. They want advice for their house. Should we try doing that? And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm driving home right now. So I'll just, with my voice, I'll just tell you, what's their design issue, and I'll answer it for them. And so she is sitting there and giving them, answering emails, and we're answering it on the podcast. So we're kind of creating a community. They're leaving comments, which is so nice. And now we're reading a comment at the beginning of every Dear Alice episode, so that way they feel like they're a part of it. We're asking them what they think on Instagram. We're emailing them back. You know what I mean? Like, we're just doing our best to sort of touch them wherever we can. So as far as like building a runway, though, you're talking about like ramping up a podcast before it's getting started.
For each episode, what do you guys do? Yeah.
I would say even like this past week, our marketing girl did an awesome job. I think what was the topic yesterday? It was agree to disagree. So kind of polarizing topics, right? That people have asked us about, like color trim or white trim, or just like where we have our opinions. And what she did is like, she took the content of like those visuals that we talked about that we're posting every day leading up to the podcast. And she asked our community, like, all these are just like, okay, white trim versus color trim. And she showed all the examples of both, like, where do you stand? And so then they're just like, well, shoot, this is where I stand. But it's just like making them want to listen to Thursday. But visually, like, she's done and we've had more engagement this week, if we look at our Instagram, than we have for months.
Yeah.
As far as every day, we have like 70 plus comments on that one question, which is high for like an Instagram post. So anyway, I would say just like kind of create something polarizing.
Create a discussion. Ask people what they think, and they'll answer back. And when they're answering back, then they're thinking about it. And they're like, I should tune into that. I'm invested, right? So I think really engaging your audience with great questions they'll respond with comments, or which do you like better? And the photos are right there. So it's just like, it's easy to do, but then all of a sudden they're in it. And then they got to know what the podcast says about it, which is great.
If I'm looking at a big picture, I would say do what you can do well to start. We've just started like filming the podcast like 3 months ago and putting it on YouTube and creating shorts from it. Intentionally, we waited, a couple of years so we could the podcast is a juggle. And I would imagine, it is for everyone. So you got to learn to, juggle two things, and then you get really good at doing those, and you can add a third, and we're going to really, try to attack YouTube and throw that in there. And I think if we would have tried to do all of these things at one time, we would have, dropped the ball, and it wouldn't have been as successful. So I think we had a clear plan of what we wanted to do. We knew we could do this well. We did that. We expanded it, and it kept expanding and expanding. And, it's like you change something 2 degrees, and over a long period of time, it, becomes what it is. So just doing what you can do well and what you can handle in your current workload I think is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And the three of you have spoken a little bit about audience engagement, but I'd love to know kind of any other specifics you have in terms of audience engagement, right? I mean, I'm getting that there's a lot of interaction on social media. I'm getting that a newsletter is going out. I'm getting that people are able to submit their questions and feel like, their voice or their design question or issue is heard on the podcast. What else have you guys done in terms of that engagement with people who listen to the podcast and the community that you've created with Dear Alice?
We just barely did, in October, we did a Dear Alice live event, which was really fun. It was kind of like our version of the master class, and people flew in from different states and they all gathered in our showroom and we taught them things live, like our 3 favorite ways to make a bed. Here's some great ways of space planning your room. If you just took these few things, this looks more designer than this. You'll, have your coffee table like this, and here's how you style a mantle, and here's all of our favorite mantles in your packet so you can see how all of those are styled. Here's what to not do. We're not karate chopping pillows anymore. So we're just teaching them things in real life. And that was a really fun way to engage. They could buy a digital ticket or they could come live in person. And it was really fun because we have a really big audience outside the US that were tuning in from Germany and, all over the world. It makes your community and your world feel smaller and like we're together. And I feel like that created a lot of intimacy, which was really, really fun. And we all left saying, oh my gosh, we've got to do this again, like more than once a year. I think that was really fun. What are some other ways we've engaged our audience? We email them, we text them an SMS whenever it's a new podcast drop so that they know.
We sometimes, if we have a question that we're like, I wonder if people would, want to hear an episode about this, we'll pull our Instagram audience. We get a lot of really good feedback. I know all of us personally, we receive DMs on Instagram. And I know that sounds like a small thing, but I think just genuinely wanting to respond to people and interacting with people is that's just furthering that relationship. And I mean, to me, that's key. I can imagine, growing up a huge fan of music as a kid, if I were to email, artists and they were messaging me back or whatever, that would be,
you'd freak out.
Yeah.
You'd freak out.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome. And honestly, I can for all of us, when people message us and are someone messaged me yesterday, it was like, your episode was so awesome. Your story was funny. And it genuinely made my day. And so I wanted to respond back to her and it was, it was fun. So I think just doing that and enjoying the process of it, enjoying the process of building that community and seeing it grow is a ton of fun.
You learn how they feel about you too, because they think I'm their girlfriend. They think that you're their buddy, because they're reaching out to us and talking to us socially and we're answering back. And so I'm glad they don't feel like we're in some glass box in a tower somewhere and that we're not approachable. I'm just glad that we're all just normal people having this normal conversation about interior design. And I feel like we're helping build passion in them to want to create a home that's unique to who they are because of the life they're living and for their lifestyle. And I just think it's a really beautiful thing that all of us are so interested in today. And it's cool that we can give a voice to it and engage with people as often as we can, answer the DMs, answer the emails, and just, make them feel like they're a part of it. I think it's just an extension of who we are, how we treat each other, and that we are trying to make this pie in the sky, big ethereal thing called taste and design really normal and put it down on the ground and talk about it, Yeah.
We've had listeners completely change their occupation, or just and we've been down. They're like, how do I do this? I love design. How do I do it from here? This is where I'm currently sitting. Would you recommend? And so total trajectories have changed because of the podcast, which is super powerful. And we've been stopped at market and people have said, I used to be in finance. Now I'm doing design. I'm so grateful that I heard you on the podcast on this episode, talk about the business of design and that if you're passionate about it, go for it. So again, your voice is strong, if you're willing to share. So anyway,
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think it's something where, sometimes impact is vast. And with podcasting, we hope it is, right? With downloads, but sometimes it's also deep, right? You're making a big change in someone's life.
Yeah.
And so that's also a really great reflection also of the power and the quality and the depth of the engagement that you guys have with your audience as well. And in terms of socials, you guys all talked about Instagram. And what is great about Dear Alice is that it's a podcast on interior design. And so Instagram is a great social medium for that, right? It's a great compliment because it's a visual platform. It's a visual social media. And so for everybody out there who's thinking, well, what's mine? It might be different, right? Maybe your audience is going to be on TikTok or Twitter or Facebook or something like that. But it's important to, like Cori said, don't do everything, do the thing that's going to work. And obviously for a design podcast, it's something where Instagram is such a visual medium. It really lends to the engagement and interaction you're able to have with your audience there, whether it's, dropping those photos of the topic of the week, that day of, or putting up a poll, how do you feel about trim? Like, hot topic or like controversial opinion, that kind of thing. So I think that that's really important as well. And all three of you spoke really about engagement, which is so important. I think there's simple things, right? Like making sure you respond to all your comments, all your DMs if you can. And if, maybe it gets out of hand, having somebody help you with that, because you want to make sure that each person who's taken the time to listen to your show feels heard and their comment or their question gets addressed. So I really love that aspect as well. And that also is what adds to the community of people that trust you and feel like it's that two-way conversation. And even if you don't, post on a specific platform or have direct messaging or comment engagement with your listenership, they're going to tell you what they think based on the download numbers, right? They're going to tell you when they listen or not what they think of the show. And so I think that that's also a really great thing. And so, I think it's also something where, if somebody reaches out to a show and they don't respond or, they don't reply to the comment or they don't reply, they don't answer the question or something like that, it can be off-putting. And so it's important to make sure that that dialogue is ongoing and that that inclusive feeling of your podcast translates into how you interact with your audience on other platforms as well. So I love what all three of you said about that. And next, I want to talk about staying innovative. The podcast has been around for a few years, which is incredible. And like all three of you have mentioned, Dear Alice is a podcast on interior design, right? Alice Lane Home Design is an interior design company. And how do you keep the podcast episode topics innovative and engaging? What are some of the strategies that the three of you use to maintain fresh content and find interesting topics to talk about every week on the show?
Take it, Sue. I feel like you're sitting on
Take it, Sue.
We sit down for an hour every week just to discuss topics. We are always DMing each other things from other home accounts. Like, this would be a fascinating podcast. Or El Decor is talking about how silver is the new metal instead of brass. Or HGTV did this big article. And so we're seeing we're like social listening to what's happening out there in the marketplace. And then we take that in and we debrief it on our podcast. We're also asking people if there's a topic, like we're going to talk about kitchens, what questions do you have? Then we can really make a whole outline based on just their questions. And we only ever give ourselves a bullet point. We never want this to feel scripted. We want to make sure that we're just talking in real time, communicating, having it feel super honest. And I've listened to podcasts where they feel very scripted and it just feels like they're reading to me. And I'm like, I am going to have a nap. This is
so bored.
This is the most boring podcast. Like, I mean, I hate to say it, but the other interior design podcasts sound like that to me. It's like monotone. Somebody's reading to me. And I'm like, oh no, if I wanted to read, I would read, but I'm not interested in you reading to me. So anyway, I think really just like social listening, understanding what people want to know, seeing what's happening in the marketplace. Ooh, this thing just happened on a project and this was a huge mistake. Let's teach the people how not to make the mistake.
Yeah, lessons learned. Let's teach them our lessons learned.
Yes. And I think the best way we learn is from failure, right? And so let's teach them what we failed on so then they don't have to fail on it, because then we all get to learn from that one thing that went wrong, whether it be some sort of layer in the flooring or the kitchen or a varnish or a countertop used, or I don't know.
I was just about to say, even like personally, like, yes, we have like all of our clients in these big high profile, jobs, but we also have like our own lives that we're designing around, which our lives are not the lives of our clients. And so we talk about emergency remodel, and that my mom went into the bathroom and her socks are wet. So of course, if there's a plumbing leak, so how did we address it? What did that look like? Because these are real life issues. And so I think people like to hear that, like the normalcy of like problems and that they're not the only ones going through this. And this is how we tackled it. So I think that that's interesting to people, is that just like listening to our hardships and how we overcame them and how we came out with something really beautiful. So
absolutely.
it
Because this
too.
is so hard and it's so
hard.
expensive, and you're so frustrated when you're midway through a project and your house is not normal and your toilets aren't flushing because you had to uninstall them and you're having to use a bathroom in the basement, and like your whole life is in shambles until these projects are done. And so you're like, you're normal. How you're feeling is normal. Suzanne's going through it right now.
Yes.
It's the worst. Make sure and do
Basements
this.
flood.
Make sure and do this.
Yeah, that happens.
It'll make the time of the project shorter if you learn from my experience. So anyway, I think, being super candid is really great.
And polarizing too, and being okay with being honest. I think that whole, she mentioned the HGTV thing, the Washington Post put out a very controversial, polarizing article on how HGTV was making people sad in their spaces because they were expected to do this thing that everybody was doing. And so we're like, we need to talk about that. Yes, it's not going to be popular amongst everyone, like even our audience, but it needs to be said, and we have feelings about it. And so I think those honestly become some of the most listened to, because people are like, oh my gosh, they're gonna unpack that. Okay. Like that's good content, so be okay to not be liked on every single episode, but that you were honest enough to address it. I think it's really trustworthy.
We're passionate about interior design, and we are all students of it still. Like we consume it, we're on Instagram and we send each other posts and check this out. And how Stu said, I read an article this morning, the Wall Street Journal released an article saying why your $2,000 sofa will be thrown away in 3 years. I was like, man, I'm so excited that this is
I hope not. That's right.
Let's quit buying disposable furniture, people.
Yeah.
It's going in the landfill. Let's educate people on why sofas are more expensive and why they're a better sit and why they're worth the money, So it might be better to rescue an old sofa that was built better and reupholster it than to buy that thing from X, place.
Big retailer or whatever.
Big box. Because it's not made super well and those things are going to break down, and then you're going to have to haul it out of your house and get rid of it somehow, right? So it's more pain than it's worth. But I think stuff like that, just watching, seeing what's coming up, being able to comment back on it, I think stuff like that gives us great content.
And how it interweaves with our passion and the design principles that we believe in. And I feel like we have these certain principles that, like I said, we believe in, and we keep retelling those over and over again in different situations. And so it's kind of if you told someone something, tell them again. And then, after that, tell them again. And then that's just what we've been doing. And it's really been refreshing to see how many people believe the same thing that we do, especially in the community that we've created. And to see the Wall Street Journal release something like that, and it's wow, it's everything that we felt like we we're the only
we're preaching anyway.
It's affirming. It's really affirming. Absolutely. Suzanne, what you said about don't be afraid to be controversial, that's important, right? And obviously you don't want to alienate anybody, and we have guidelines, right? Nothing extreme or hate speech, but within your topic it's okay to have opinions, which I think is really important. And I think what each of you said makes a lot of sense, because when a lot of podcasters talk about episodes, every podcast is going to have those couple of episodes, handful of episodes that do exponential, just something about it, right? Whether it's the topic, whether it's the guest, whether it's the timing of it. And a lot of the time, episodes that are super successful, right? Maybe you have one on, I just keep coming back to, we don't karate chop pillows anymore, right? Maybe you have I know you guys have a podcast episode on it, but maybe you have one, titled, we don't karate chop pillows anymore. And every time somebody searches for that or, wants to know about pillows and what we're doing now, they're going to go back and listen. And so what's great about podcasting is that, unless you're a news podcast, really a lot of that content's evergreen. So you're going to keep being able to build the audience. You're going to keep being able to serve ads on those episodes that are really evergreen and have that popularity. And you guys can speak to this. There are episodes that are going to be out of the ballpark. And, when you're recording them, maybe they seem a little bit shiny or special, or maybe they don't, but the downloads are going to tell you a different story. So that's number one. And then, number two, I think what you also said, Jess, in terms of the project's taking a long time. And Suzanne, what you said in terms of the relatability, a lot of the projects that when you think, okay, home interior design, a lot of it is aspirational and very expensive for a lot of people. And so it's something where, how do they apply those design principles or, maybe some of the ideas to their life or their home, or how do they problem solve when a basement floods, that kind of thing. And so I think having that approach of, not just from that top down, not like, hey, do you want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a home design? Or, here's what we're doing and here's what you can gain from it. And here's the conversation we're having and here's what inspired it, I think is a lot more inclusive as well. And I wanted to ask you guys, going back to what I had just said, what are some of those episodes that you've noticed people just bring back up or, DM you about, ask questions about, or comment on even the most after they're not new?
Great question. I mean, I think we know top performing podcasts, which we had a real estate expert come on last year, and we were like, interest rates were rising and people were putting their projects on hold. And we're all like, whoa, let's wait and watch what the market does before we make these massive investments. Because for most people, the biggest financial investment they make is their home, and then their car after that. So anyway, we had him come on and really talk about real estate, what was happening in the marketplace, that these interest rates are actually normal. 2% isn't normal. 3% is not normal. What's normal is 5 and 6%, which is where we are right now. What's not normal was 19, 21% in the 80s. So really, we're sitting in a good spot and we should continue to move forward with our plans and our dreams because this is a normal interest rate, is what he was teaching us.
Right?
Yeah.
He market correction.
Called it a market correction. What's not normal is 2 and 3. Don't ever even expect 2 and 3 to come back. Let's move on with our lives. Let's move on with our projects. And he was giving lots of examples of things that he thinks are a really great investment when it comes to real estate. And like even things that we should be doing with our kids. And that was like one of our top episodes, how to organize your closet. In the first year that we were doing the podcast, that was our number one performing podcast. Really great tips. We had an organizer come on that does this for all sorts of people and gets paid good money to do it. She gave her favorite hanger. She gave her method. She talked about how to reduce inventory in closets emotionally. She just took us through a whole lot of things that were really intelligent and people loved it. I'm sure it was shareable. I don't know. What do you think as far as like comments coming in though? Like what are top favorite pod? Soon I never see the comments or read them.
We get DMs.
I don't know where they go.
Yeah.
Our team has to read us certain comments, but I think you know more than we do about.
Yeah. If we can give people like a list of things, say like, our 10, tips for doing, X, those have been great. And then people can really itemize like, and really just start, being able to create a list of their own and start checking those things off. I think those have always been, really good for us. And it's honestly, it's easier for us to organize as well as far as content goes. So I think that's huge. And again, that's just us giving free information. Like this is what we would do. We think you should too.
Yeah.
I think we just got feedback that like our most listened to in like the last quarter was like what we're seeing for next quarter trends, so I think like paying attention to words that like you guys kind of give us too, that, are like good for searching, right? Is trends, top 10, it's palatable stuff that like people can really attack and be successful at and like learn something great within like the 20 to 40 minutes that we're podcasting. So yeah, just easy instruction, interesting topics, and the right words, honestly.
Yeah. And then kind of, like what's buzzworthy right now. And I think every time you get up to bat, it's not going to be a home run, but if you keep consistent content and you just try to make that content as best you can, every once in a while you will hit a home run, and it'll feel good. And
I think too, like we try really hard to just stay up on, like we record, there's very like maybe once or twice a year where we do like a best of the year, but like we're releasing a new podcast every single week.
Even
and we have through the holidays. Like it's very rare that we have like we skip a week. And so I think that's also, it keeps people like, I know that when I listen to podcasts and like they take a break, I stop listening to it. And like sometimes I never go back to it just because like
that drop off.
The drop off for sure. So I think just like staying with it, like just stick with it.
Keep them in your pocket. Stay in the groove.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's good.
Stay in the groove. Yeah, consistency is key. And we've seen that, with downloads that podcasters are getting. And part of that is audience trust, right? So, Suzanne, like what you were saying is when people are listening, they know it's going to, hey, Dear Alice is coming out on a Thursday. It's Thursday. And so if Thursday hits and it doesn't come out, that promise is a little bit broken. right? And maybe you'll come out the next Thursday and it'll be okay, but maybe you'll skip a couple of Thursdays. And that's where, pod fade comes in, where it's, that podcaster burnout. And it's important to make sure that you have systems in place, right? Whether you're recording multiple episodes at once or you're outsourcing some of your content or, Cori, like what you said as well, it's doing what works and being consistent about it, right? When we're talking about Instagram and promoting the podcast, it's the same for making the podcast and publishing. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing it in a way that the podcast has a chance to grow, right? And offers something to the audience that they know what they're going to get. And it's not constantly shifting or changing in a way that they don't understand it on maybe even a subconscious level as well.
We've even had feedback where like we're part of their routine. So
yeah,
like they're
totally.
Every Thursday morning they go on a walk with their mom and their sister, and they all have their AirPods in, and they're all listening to the podcast together, and it feels like we're going on a walk with them. Or we're part of like while they're folding laundry, and they feel a little bit more luxurious while they're doing this common task that we all have to deal with. And I'm like, I love that we're part of their routine. I remember like even like before pods, like everything, like the Today Show, the morning show is part of my routine. Martha Stewart was part of my routine, and podcasts have kind of replaced that. But I think it's important to like kind of find your pocket and stay there.
Yeah, feel that trust, show up for them every time. It's great.
Oh.
We actually record 3 at a time when we sit down to do it. When we actually have the space carved out and the lights are set up and the cameras and we're actually doing it, we're like, it's just easier to bang out a couple. And so that helps us get farther ahead, which helps us be more consistent too. So I would say that would be a best practice for us is don't just record one at a time. You're in the group. You're in the mood, you're talking, it's social.
You got the mic set up, right? Yeah.
Actually, the first one is like always just a little bit rusty, and then the second one's great, and the third one's really juicy. So I think we even get better the longer that we keep talking. So that's another reason why not to just go cold and record one each time, because you're going to be really, really lubricated and slippery and awesome by that third one. Yeah. So that works for us.
I remember we even used to do like 4 at a time, and by episode 4, we were like burnout. Like at 4 wasn't a good episode. Yeah. So we learned that 3 was like our max.
Yeah.
And they continually got better.
Totally.
And that's something that each podcaster is going to learn for them on their journey, right? Each show is going to have, hey, how many can I record at one time where they're going to sound good, where we're going to be in the flow of the conversation, where I'm not going to, have tried to use my brain too much, right? It's something where I think that's, you can tell. It's definitely something where when you're listening, and when things are snappy, right? And also maybe when there's longer pauses or somebody's struggling to find words or things are a little bit clunkier as well. So I think that's really great advice as well. Well, it's just been such a pleasure to speak to the three of you today. Cori, Jess, Suzanne, it's just been so great. I'm going to read our brief outro. And like I mentioned, we've got links to Dear Alice in the description of today's event. And also if you're rewatching on YouTube or Podbean's LinkedIn, we'll also have it there. And I'm going to read our brief outro and then we will wrap up for today. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And thank you everyone for joining us at Podcasting Smarter for our January live event, Designing Success, a conversation with the Dear Alice Design Podcast on podcast growth and monetization with Cori Place, Jess Bennett, and Suzanne Hall, the creative forces behind Alice Lane Interior Design. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions like this one with top podcasters, and we also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast, so make sure to check those out as well. This event is part of Podbean's big January launch month, here with a series of events all about launching and helping you maintain a successful and sustainable podcast in 2024 and beyond. If you joined late or want to have another listen to this conversation, you can replay this live on Podbean's YouTube channel and on the Podcasting Smarter podcast. Podcasting Smarter and today's event are brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetizing platform and home to over 640,000 podcasts. To start your podcast today, head over to podbean.com. And if you have any questions, you can also email us always at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. Thank you so much for joining us and stay tuned for more podcasting tips and best practices. In February, we have a really exciting AMA as well, so make sure you submit your questions to that podcastingsmarter@podbean.com email. It'll be here in the description. Happy podcasting, everyone, and Happy New Year. Happy January launch month. Thanks, everybody.